Imagine that a man who almost never left his city was able to look into the very foundations of the universe and the human mind, creating a real operating system for thinking. His name is Immanuel Kant. While the world around him was shaken by wars and revolutions, he, in the silence of his study, carried out a revolution in philosophy, the consequences of which we still feel today. How does our consciousness work? What are good and evil in reality? And why are his ideas about the categorical imperative more relevant than ever today, in an era of post-truth and moral dilemmas? Get comfortable, my friend. A fascinating journey awaits you. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Alright, let's dive into the early days of Immanuel Kant's life and how they shaped his revolutionary mindset. Born on April 22, 1724, in Königsberg, Prussia, Kant grew up in a vibrant city that bustled with trade and ideas, thanks to one of Europe's top universities right there. His dad worked as a harness maker while his mom was a devoutly religious woman who inspired young Immanuel with a thirst for knowledge and a strong sense of morality. The Kants were part of the Pietist movement, a kind of Protestantism that valued personal religious experience and moral purity over strict doctrines. This early influence left a lasting mark on Kant's focus on moral duty and his belief in practical reason over mere speculation. As a child, Kant was immersed in the multicultural mix of cultures that was Königsberg, where German, Polish, Russian, and Lithuanian influences mingled. Daily, ships would bring in goods and new ideas from all around Europe. The university in town drew scholars from German-speaking regions far and wide, creating a dynamic intellectual environment that was key to Kant's growth. This rich cultural exposure is what seeded Kant's vision of a global community aiming for everlasting peace. At 16, Kant took the next big step by enrolling at the University of Königsberg, where he encountered Christian Wolff's philosophical framework. Wolff had built a system based on Leibniz's rationalist philosophy, claiming all knowledge could be derived from pure reason. But Kant didn't stop there. He also studied with Martin Knudsen, who introduced him to the empirical insights of Isaac Newton and the skepticism of David Hume. This blend of rationalism and empiricism set the stage for Kant's future groundbreaking synthesis. Kant's favourite educator, Knudsen, was a captivating mix of deep faith and advanced scientific insight. Knudsen was among the early German thinkers to truly understand the groundbreaking nature of Newton's theories in physics. Under his mentorship, Kant started pondering an intriguing question. If nature itself followed universal rules that reason could uncover, could human thought and actions be governed by similar laws? When Kant was just 22, in 1746, his father passed away, leaving the family financially strapped. This forced Kant to leave his studies unfinished and take up tutoring for wealthy families in the countryside. Though challenging, these 9 years of isolation turned out to be key for Kant's development. With fewer academic pressures, he delved into deep philosophical and scientific questions, penning his initial major work, Thoughts on the True Estimation of Living Forces. In it, Kant tackled a debate between the followers of Leibniz and Newton about measuring forces in physics. Although largely overlooked at the time, this work displayed Kant's signature approach of reconciling opposing perspectives rather than taking sides. It set the tone for his mature philosophy, which showed how reason and experience both play vital roles in human understanding. By 1755, Kant was back at the university, completing his doctorate and starting his journey as a lecturer. Over the next 15 years, he taught a wide array of subjects: math, physics, geography, anthropology, logic, metaphysics, and ethics, forcing him to think about how these different fields connect. He began to see that all human intellectual pursuits, from scientific inquiries to moral reasoning and even art, might share fundamental principles. During what scholars call his pre-critical years, Kant made significant contributions to fields like astronomy and anthropology. In his work, Universal Natural History and Theory of the Heavens, He put forth what is now known as the nebula hypothesis about the solar system's formation. This showcases Kant's ability to engage thoughtfully with some of the grandest questions out there. Instead of just looking at isolated events, he aimed to grasp the deep principles that rule the whole universe. It was David Hume's writings in the 1760s that shook Kant out of what he called his dogmatic slumber. Hume had put forth the idea that we can never fully justify believing in cause and effect, an outside world, or even our own identity over time. If Hume was correct, science, morality, and everyday reasoning had no solid ground to stand on. This idea seemed to lead straight to doubting all human knowledge. However, Kant saw that Hume's critiques, while they tore apart earlier philosophies, actually offered a clue towards solving the problem. The issue wasn't that human reasoning was flawed, but that philosophers misunderstood its workings. They thought knowledge had to come entirely from pure reasoning without experience, or solely from experience without reasoning. Kant perceived this as a false dichotomy. What if gaining knowledge requires both the sensory information we get from experiences and the organizational touch of our reasoning? What if our mind actively shapes how we experience things instead of just absorbing them? What if concepts like space, time, and causation are not inherent properties of objects independent of us, but are rather contributions of our mind? These groundbreaking ideas became the foundation of Kant's critical philosophy. He had a huge realization. The same faculty that helps us understand the natural world might also be where moral responsibility comes from. Reason does not just uncover the laws of nature, it also dictates rules for how humans should act. Just like natural laws are universal and necessary, moral laws should be too. This led Kant to propose his famous categorical imperative and his idea of humans as self-governing moral beings. By 1770, he had sketched out the basics of his critical philosophy, though it took another 11 years to flesh out his ideas and release his first major work. During this time, often called his silent decade, Kant was undertaking what he described as the toughest intellectual work of his life. He wasn't just formulating new philosophical ideas, but was inventing an entirely new method to tackle the essential questions about human existence. In the end, he produced 3 major works that together stand as some of the most remarkable contributions in the history of human thought. Part 2. When Kant was 57, he dropped a bombshell in the world of philosophy with the release of the Critique of Pure Reason in 1781. This work wasn't just any book. It was a big, intricate piece that came to life after more than 10 years of Kant diving deep into understanding human knowledge. He admitted that he wrestled with the concepts for nearly a dozen years, but when it came to writing it all down, he cranked it out in just 4 to 5 months during a surge of inspiration. That quick turnaround hints at just how well he had his thoughts sorted out from all those years of contemplation. So, what's this first critique all about? It's actually centered on a seemingly straightforward question. How is synthetic a priori knowledge possible? To unpack why this question was groundbreaking, we need to grasp what Kant was getting at with these terms. Analytic judgments are like saying all bachelors are unmarried, stuff where the answer is already tucked into the question. Meanwhile, synthetic judgments toss in new info, like saying this bachelor is tall. A priori knowledge is the type you can have without needing to experience it firsthand, as opposed to a posteriori knowledge, which you get through actual experience. The common belief back then was that a priori knowledge had to be analytic, and synthetic knowledge had to come from experience. But Kant saw things differently. He realized that math and some basic science stuff are both synthetic and a priori. Take math, for example. Judgments like 7 plus 5 equals 12 are synthetic because you can't find the concept of 12 lurking in 7 or 5. Still, math truths like this aren't based on past experiences. They're universal and necessary. And in science, principles like every event has a cause are also synthetic, because the idea of causation isn't just sitting there in the concept of an event. Yet these ideas apply to all our possible experiences, not just specific incidents we've come across. Discovering this type of knowledge meant the mind played an active role in shaping our experiences. If we were purely passive receivers, our knowledge would be either strictly analytic or based solely on empirical evidence. But the universal and necessary facts we know about the world point out that our minds impose patterns and categories on the info we get from our senses. This was at the heart of what Kant dubbed as transcendental idealism. Kant split the critique into two primary parts: the transcendental aesthetic, which tackles how we understand the world through our senses, and the transcendental logic, which digs into the concepts and principles by which we grasp understanding. Each segment looks into different methods the mind autonomously shapes our experiences. The aesthetic argues that space and time aren't features of objects themselves, but are the forms through which we have to perceive any object. Meanwhile, the logic piece outlines 12 fundamental categories that we use to shape our raw perceptions into a cohesive understanding of objects. Kant's approach in this critique was revolutionary. He called it transcendental analysis because it aimed at discovering the a priori conditions needed to make experience possible. Instead of questioning what we can know about various objects, Kant pondered what needs to be true about our cognitive abilities for us to experience the world as we do. This way of looking at things marked Kant's Copernican revolution. Kant's work established clear boundaries for what pure reason could achieve. We can only rely on reason for genuine knowledge concerning things we could potentially experience. When reason tries to reach beyond these boundaries, to think about things in themselves, it inevitably ends up in a mess of contradictions and false notions. Hence, any traditional metaphysics claiming to prove the reality of God, the soul's immortality, or the will's freedom through pure reason has to be dismissed as impossible. Yet this ceiling on knowledge wasn't Kant being pessimistic. Quite the opposite. By laying out exactly what pure reason could and couldn't do, he placed the underpinnings of math, natural science, and empirical knowledge on solid ground. He explained why thinking beyond possible experiences in the realm of metaphysics couldn't achieve anything useful. To sum it up, Kant felt he needed to restrict knowledge to clear space for faith. When the first edition of his critique came out, it barely got any attention, and many people just couldn't wrap their heads around it because it was so challenging and abstract. Some folks even mistook it for a version of idealism like Berkeley's, believing that it claimed material objects didn't exist. That really bugged Kant, so he spent a lot of time trying to clear things up in his later writings. So in 1787, he rolled out a second edition with major updates, adding some crucial clarifications and introducing a brand new part he called the refutation of idealism. Basically, this part was meant to explain that his idea of a transcendental idealism was actually a kind of empirical realism. Although concepts like space, time, and other categories come from the mind, he argued that the objects we encounter in space and time, like tables, chairs, and trees, are definitely real. These physical things exist on their own, separate from our personal minds, but still rely on a human experience overall. For those who got it, the first critique was groundbreaking. It shook things up quite a bit. It put an end to the whole rationalist metaphysics tradition that had been ruling German philosophy for over 100 years. It also pointed out where British empiricism fell short, but still hung on to the idea that experience matters. Most importantly, it offered fresh perspectives on how we think about the connections between the mind and the world, between subjects and objects, and between appearance and reality. Part 3. Space and Time as Inner Tools. In the mind-bending introduction of the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant shakes things up by presenting some of his most groundbreaking ideas. He flips the script, claiming that space and time aren't parts of reality floating around on their own. Instead, they're like built-in filters through which we humans are wired to see things. That's a game changer for how we think about the physical world, math, and even life itself. To get where Kant's coming from, we need to separate out two things: sensation and intuition. Think of sensation as the raw, unorganized flood of data hitting our senses. is just chaos without any rhyme or reason. On the other hand, when sensation gets neat and tidy, organized through space and time, it becomes intuition. Suddenly, all those sensations work together, placing objects in the time and space. Kant goes all out to make his case that space and time aren't part and parcel of things as they might really be. His metaphysical reasons hinge on the idea that before we even experience anything, we need to assume space and time are there. You can't picture objects just hanging out without being somewhere in space and time. You can imagine space and time hanging around empty, sans objects, showing they are the groundwork before anything else pops up. Then he dives into the transcendental argument, pointing out that space and time aren't just picked up from experience, they're pre-experience frameworks. That's why math holds up so well. It builds its case not from abstract ideas but by literally drawing and counting in space and time. The sure-shot truth of geometry and those clockwork numbers in arithmetic only make sense if space and time are built into our very being. And here's the kicker. The physical universe as we know it, it only operates within this space-time matrix our minds create. Your favourite chair, the room around you, your own body, they're part of this mind-organised structure. They're not fake, but they are appearances filtered through our perception. This isn't just philosophical musings. It hits science hard too. Everything physics describes about the universe hinges on space and time. Yet these aren't mind-independent features of the world. Sure, we learn real things through science, but it's all filtered through our mental lenses. What's the world like without those filters? Physics doesn't cover that. Kant also gives us a fresh take on math. Forget those abstract worlds or math as just a handy tool. It's more fundamental, rooted in the way we have to process any experience. Geometric truths? They're true because space, as we perceive it, is structured exactly that way. The same goes for time, which is crucial not just for our inner thoughts, but for ordering everything else we experience. Whether it's memories, predictions, or sense of self, it all flows through the channel of time. But hold up. If space and time are all in our heads, what else is out there? Kant assures us that things do exist independently, but they're not the spatial temporal entities we perceive. They're out there in a way that doesn't fit our usual dimensions of reality. It's a bit mind-boggling, isn't it? We struggle to even imagine things that aren't bound by space or time. But Kant argued that this struggle is a limitation of how we perceive things, not necessarily how things really are. We have the ability to think about something existing outside of time and space, even if we can't truly picture it or experience it firsthand. This brings us to one of the trickiest parts of Kant's ideas. How can things that aren't in space or time influence us in a way that lets our senses pick them up, which then our minds process through space and time? You see, causation is something we usually think of happening over time. So how can something outside of time be the cause of anything we experience? Kant recognized that this was a tough nut to crack. He suggested we keep in mind the difference between cause and effect as we experience it in space and time, and whatever the connection is between the true nature of things and how they show up to us. Scholars today still find a lot of value in Kant's view that space and time are more about how our minds structure what we sense, even if not everyone agrees with him completely. What has become clearer over time is his point that our minds actively shape our experiences, rather than just taking them in passively. This idea has become a big deal in modern philosophy and the study of how we think. Even if we don't all buy into the notion that space and time, according to Kant, are purely ideal, his arguments push us away from the simplistic view that we just see the world as it is. There's a much deeper, more complicated connection between us and the world than we might think at first. Part 4. Kant dives into how our minds make sense of what we see and feel in the world. He first laid out that space and time are like the foundational settings for how we perceive anything. Now he's tackling the big question. How does our mind take all this sensory info and make it into a clear picture of objects around us? The key, he says, lies in what he calls the pure concepts of understanding, also known as categories. Think of them as mental tools we're born with. We need these tools to make sense of any experience. Kant made the case that human understanding operates in a step-by-step way. We don't just perceive objects directly. Instead, we have to use these concepts to interpret what our senses pick up. Unlike a kind of divine mind that would just get objects instantly, we have to do some work. We connect dots through concepts, organizing the sensory mess into something that makes logical sense. Without these categories, we just have a jumble of senses with no real order or meaning. The toughest and most original part of Kant's thinking was figuring out where these categories come from. He noticed that thinking means making judgments, and making judgments means fitting ideas into concepts using certain logic. The old-school logic lists 12 judgment types, like universal, particular, singular, and so on. Kant matched each type of judgment to a concept or category, and ended up with 12 categories split into 4 groups of 3. For quantity, we've got unity, plurality, and totality. For quality, there's reality, negation, and limitation. For relation, our tools are substance and accident, causality and dependence, plus community or reciprocity. Lastly, for modality, we talk about possibility and impossibility, existence and non-existence, as well as necessity and contingency. Each of these plays a big role in how we see and understand the world. Using the category of substance, for example, we tell the difference between stable objects and their changing features. It's how we know things can last over time even as they change. Causality is what lets us link events, not just see them happen one after another. And unity? That's how we see different traits as part of one object, not just random bits and pieces. But here's a challenge Kant faced. How do we know these mental tools we have actually fit with the real stuff we sense in the world? This is what he called the problem of the transcendental deduction of the categories. It's not enough to just have these categories. He had to prove they work in real experiences. To solve this, Kant showed that the same part of our mind that organizes concepts also organizes what we sense. Our understanding doesn't just come up with concepts. It connects the dots of sensation into a coherent picture of the world. So these categories must apply to anything we could experience. A big piece of this puzzle is the idea of the transcendental unity of our perception. In plain terms, Kant said that any thought or perception has to be something I can link to my own thinking self. This I think isn't a thing I experience. It's more like the backbone that makes organizing experiences possible. When we think about the way we experience things, there's something called the transcendental unity of self-consciousness that's at work, which also helps us create a unified experience of the world by using these things known as categories. This concept ties into one of Kant's big ideas. According to Kant, what we experience are not independent, standalone entities, but instead, they are appearances shaped by how our mind interacts with them. So when you check out a house, for example, you're not just soaking in data from a house that's just chilling out there on its own. Nope. Your mind is actively sorting through and organizing your sense of space and time using these categories, like concepts of substance, unity, and plurality, to form this experience of a house. The house you see is a real thing, sure, but it only holds meaning within the way humans think and process information. These categories do more than just that. They're also the groundwork for what's known as principles of pure understanding. These are these smart-sounding synthetic, a priori judgments that universally apply when we experience stuff. They include things like intuition, axioms, saying all our intuitions are big things, measurements we make across space and time. Then there's the anticipations of perception, stating sensations have levels of intensity. There's also the analogies of experience, which throw in principles like substance, causation, and interaction. Lastly, you've got the postulates of empirical thinking, which talk about what's possible, what's real, and what's necessary for the things we experience. Among these, the second analogy is pretty famous. It goes like this. All changes we observe follow the chain of cause and effect. This isn't just telling us how things happen around us. It's actually saying this relationship is essential for our very ability to have these experiences. Without understanding causal sequences, you wouldn't be able to tell whether happenings are occurring objectively, over time, or if they're just a mix of your subjective thoughts. Causation is something our minds add to experiences to make them coherent and workable, rather than something simply found within the experiences themselves. Part 5. The transcendental deduction and the unity of experience. The transcendental deduction of categories is possibly the most challenging and crucial part of Kant's critique of pure reason. Here, Kant tries to demonstrate that the 12 categories necessarily apply to every possible experience. Without establishing this, the categories would remain just subjective concepts, lacking any assured connection to the external world we encounter. Whether this argument succeeds or not is critical for Kant's ability to defend synthetic, a priori knowledge and avoid falling into either rigid rationalism or skeptical empiricism. Kant encountered a unique problem that had never been addressed before in philosophy. Earlier thinkers simply took for granted that our concepts matched up with reality. They believed this either because these concepts were seen as innate ideas given by God, or were derived directly from our experiences. However, Kant showed that these fundamental concepts for understanding, his categories, are neither born with us in a rationalist tradition, nor developed from experience in an empiricist way. They are pure concepts that our understanding inherently brings to our experiences. So how can we be sure these are applicable to the objects we come across? Kant's approach was to demonstrate that the same active mental process that brings about conceptual unity in our thoughts also creates unity within experiences themselves. His argument is laid out through a series of connected steps, each highlighting a different way our understanding shapes our experiences. The central idea here is that experiencing isn't about passively receiving what's around us, but actively organizing it with our understanding using preset rules. Kant's argument kicks off with what he called the transcendental unity of apperception. This isn't about being aware of oneself as an individual with certain traits, but rather the foundational condition needed for any coherent sense of self or experience. To create a complete experience, all our representations need to be potentially linked under one consciousness. As Kant noted, everything I perceive must be capable of being associated with the thought I think, or else they are meaningless to me. However, this transcendental unity isn't a given. It's generated through an act of synthesis. We encounter a slew of sensory inputs that arrive as a succession of different impressions, but they don't naturally come with unity. To convert these disparate inputs into a cohesive experience, our understanding needs to actively bind them together according to certain rules. This synthesis, termed by Kant as the transcendental synthesis of imagination, is directed by the categories, which serve as guidelines for associating these representations. Kant's pivotal point is saying that the same synthesis responsible for crafting a unified consciousness also creates the objectivity of our experience. For instance, when I perceive a house, the mental activity that allows me to claim diverse sensory impressions as my own is identical to the activity that makes these impressions into the representation of an object. There isn't first a personal sense of awareness, then a separate connection to objects. Instead, objective understanding and personal unity arise from the same mental work of synthesizing concepts. This togetherness means the categories, as rules for synthesis, need to apply to any potential object we could experience. Things we experience aren't standalone entities we simply categorize later on. Instead, they're framed as objects through the lens of categories applied to the raw sensory data we receive. Without these categories, what we experience would just be a random assortment of senses with no structure or significance. Kant illustrated this concept with his well-known example about subjective versus objective time sequences. When I look at a house, I can examine its parts in any sequence, from top to bottom or vice versa. This order in which I choose to look that the house is subjective and doesn't reveal anything about the house itself. But when watching a ship move downstream, the order of perceptions is objective and necessary. I see the ship at one spot, then another. This order is fixed and can't be rearranged. The objectivity of this sequence emerges because the category of causality organizes the given sensory data. Alright, so here's the scoop. The deduction provides this nifty explanation for why we're able to have synthetic a priori knowledge concerning things we experience. It's like this. The stuff we come across in life is shaped when we apply categories to it, and because these categories are concepts we understand from the get-go, we can figure out up front that anything we encounter will follow certain categorical rules. It's not about slapping random forms onto some standalone reality. Rather, these bits of experience become what they are only through the mind's active role in piecing them together. Being an experience in a nutshell means getting put together by these categorical blueprints. But hold up. The deduction also highlights that there's a boundary here. Categories work their magic on things we might experience, but that's as far as they go. We can't apply categories to comprehend things beyond all potential experience. Once we try to step outside the bounds of what we could realistically grasp, the connection with our sensible intuition breaks down, and we end up with hollow ideas that don't hold up in real life. Over time, the transcendental deduction went through some significant changes between the first and second editions of the critique. Early on, in the first edition, the emphasis was on how imagination plays a part in putting it all together, but by the second edition, there was a greater focus on understanding and self-awareness. Both takes aim to land the same point, but they tackle it with a bit of a different spin. The main insight doesn't change though. What makes it possible for us to have a unified self-awareness is also what enables us to have a coherent experience of the world. Today, philosophers are still duking it out over whether Kant knocked it out of the park with his argument. Some folks think he's mixing up how we mentally organize stuff with what's logically necessary to experience it. Others believe he hit the nail on the head, showing just how crucial categorical synthesis is to understanding what's around us. No matter which side you're on, the bottom line is that the transcendental deduction has reshaped how we think about the link between our minds and the world around us, leaving a lasting mark on philosophy as we know it. Part 6. So we're diving into a pretty wild world of thought, where philosopher Immanuel Kant threw down some big ideas. He talked about phenomena and noumena, which are at the core of his transcendental idealism, a major concept that shook up philosophy. This stuff comes out of what he figured out in his works Transcendental Aesthetic and Transcendental Analytic. Basically, he said we, as humans, can only really know about stuff that we can actually experience. To really grasp this, we have to dig into what Kant meant by phenomena and noumena, and how these ideas fit into his larger philosophical puzzle. So when we talk phenomena, we're not talking about some make-believe stuff or something out of a fairy tale. These are the very objects we can actually know about, like the tree you see outside. That very tree is a phenomenon, and it isn't just in your head. It's a part of the real world, but it's also shaped by how we, as humans, experience the world. That tree exists in space and time because that's just how we, being human, perceive things. It's not that this makes the tree any less real, it's just our version of reality. Kant wasn't saying this reality is fake, rather it's real, within the bounds of how we understand it. Objects we study in science or see in our day-to-day life are genuinely real, but they aren't out there in space and time without a connection to our minds. They're significant in how we experience them. Then comes the idea of noumena, or things in themselves. These are the mysterious entities that exist regardless of how we experience the world. We can think about these things, but we can't truly know them, because our understanding is limited by our human condition. Kant thought it was important to remember our cognitive limits, so we don't mistakenly assume our perception captures the whole of reality. Now, here's where things get dicey. How do these phenomena and noumena connect? This has fired up tons of debates. Some folks think of this as a two-sided coin, where phenomena and noumena are just two viewpoints on the same thing. Others argue they're entirely separate things. Both ideas dive into complicated philosophical waters. The two-aspect idea suggests that we're just looking at the same thing, but from different angles, like considering yourself as both a being governed by natural laws as a phenomenon, and as someone capable of free will as a noumenal. Basically, it's about different angles on the same person. However, explaining how something can influence our understanding if it's just two sides of a coin, that's tricky. Kant wrote that phenomena are how these things in themselves tweak our senses, suggesting they're separate and can interact. To avoid these hang-ups, some folks go with the two-object idea, seeing phenomena and noumena as distinct. This interpretation makes sense for Kant's writings about how things in themselves impact us, giving us the raw experiences that shape our reality. Even if we can't really know what these unseen things are, we know they must be doing something behind the scenes. The idea of the two-object theory hits quite a snag because it ends up making things in themselves totally unknowable, while asserting they exist and influence us. If stuff like existence and causation are only for things we can perceive, then how on earth can we talk or think about noumena, things beyond our comprehension, as if they exist and cause our sensations? This contradiction seems to be a major flaw in Kant's system. It's like using the very concepts that Kant limits to the world we know, to make claims about a world we can't know. The biggest issue with the distinction between phenomena, what we can perceive, and noumena, what we can't, is a dilemma often referred to by researchers as the problem of affection. Kant needs these unknowable things to trigger our senses in order to give us the raw data that our minds shape into experiences. But here's the kicker. Affection is basically a type of cause and effect that happens in time, and Kant has argued that both causation and time are only phenomena we perceive. So how can these timeless non-causal things have any effect on our time-bound senses? Some thinkers try to sort this out by separating the idea of empirical affection, which happens in our perceivable world, from the transcendental affection, which is the beyond-time basis for phenomena found in things themselves. Others believe that affection isn't really a cause and effect scenario, but rather an idea that shows how limited and receptive human understanding is. Still, there are those who feel Kant's take is just a mess, and either needs to be tossed out or seriously overhauled. Even with all these interpretive headaches, the distinction between phenomena and noumena is key to Kant's philosophy. It helps explain how we can gain real knowledge that is still limited in reach. It forms the base for Kant's moral ideas, by safeguarding a space where freedom can exist. Plus, it blocks the overreaching use of scientific ideas beyond their rightful place. Finally, it keeps us humble about human reason's limits while backing up reason's legitimate claims within those bounds. Part 7. Alright, so we're diving into the last big part of Kant's critique of pure reason, which is called the transcendental dialectic. This part is all about how pure reason, that's our ability to think and understand, can trick us into believing things beyond what we can actually experience. These aren't random mistakes we could fix by thinking harder, but rather built-in illusions that are part of how reason works. If we understand these illusions, we get a better grip on the strengths and weaknesses of human thinking. Reason has this urge to make our knowledge neat and tidy, looking for complete and unconditional truths. It doesn't just want bits and pieces of knowledge from experience, but craves total certainty and fundamental principles. That drive is super useful for shaping what we learn from the world into solid theories. But when reason tries to overreach beyond what's possible to experience, it hits contradictions known as antinomies. There are 4 big antinomies, or unsolvable problems, in pure reason. They're the questions we just can't help but ask, even though there's no way to answer them. Each antinomy acts like a double-edged sword with a thesis, an idea, and an antithesis, the opposite idea, both seeming logical but also contradicting each other. The first one deals with whether the universe is limited or infinite in space and time. The thesis argues the universe must have a starting point and be finite, because an infinite sequence can't be completed. The antithesis, however, says the universe can't have a start or limit, because any starting point would require a before or a boundary before it. Both arguments feel spot on, but they cancel each other out. Next up is the question of simplicity versus complexity, whether everything is made of basic simple parts or if nothing simple really exists. The thesis suggests that things must be made of simple parts, as things can be broken down in our thoughts. The antithesis counters that nothing simple exists because anything that takes up space can always be divided. Again, both notions seem reasonable, but they can't both be right. The third antinomy asks if everything can be explained by natural causes or if free will is necessary too. The thesis believes in free will, arguing that without it, we'd have an endless chain of causes with no beginning. Meanwhile, the antithesis says free will isn't possible, since it breaks the rule that every event has a cause. This one's a biggie, especially since moral responsibility leans on free will, yet science leans on cause and effect. The last antinomy deals with whether there's a necessary being, like a foundational cause involved in the universe. The thesis argues there must be something absolutely necessary, otherwise, the chain of dependent things is incomplete. The antithesis, in turn, argues that a necessary being can't exist because it conflicts with the changing nature of things. This touches on traditional arguments about God and existence. Kant's way of sorting out these puzzles relies heavily on the difference between what we can experience, phenomena, and what we can't, noumena. The first two antinomies, the ones about quantity, are tackled by rejecting both sides of the argument. The world isn't finite or infinite because the whole world, as an idea, isn't something we can fully grasp through experience. We can keep learning more about space and time, but never reach the complete picture reason wants. As for the last two antinomies, dealing with existence, Kant suggests a different approach. Here, both sides of the argument can be true, if we're careful about distinguishing where and how we apply the concepts. In the world of what we can see and touch, everything sticks to set natural laws, no exceptions. But in the world beyond our senses, maybe there's room for freedom. Think about a chain of events in our world that doesn't have to rely on some unchanging cause, yet there could still be a timeless being that is the foundation of it all. This way of thinking, about the third and fourth big debates, lets us imagine moral freedom and spirituality can exist without clashing with science. Science, after all, holds that everything we observe follows universal laws, while morality assumes that rational folks have free will in a different sense beyond observation. These ideas don't step on each other's toes because they belong to separate worlds. For Kant, balancing these ideas of nature's rules and moral freedom is a big part of his philosophy. These debates also show how reason should work. Instead of chasing after ultimate truths we can't reach, reason should push us to connect more dots in what we can see and know. Big ideas like thinking about the soul, the universe, or God help us to aim for understanding in areas like psychology, cosmology, and theology, even if we can't pin down final answers. Using reason like this is both legit and useful, but trying to use it to figure out things beyond our experience is misleading and causes confusion. This is because Kant believed humans are naturally inclined to ponder metaphysical questions, even though they have no concrete answers. Just like optical illusions fool the senses, metaphysical illusions lead our reasoning astray. We can't get rid of these illusions, but we can learn to identify them and not be fooled. Recognizing these illusions for what they are is what Kant saw as enlightenment. Not getting rid of illusions, but seeing them clearly. Part 8. After Kant wrapped up his deep dive into pure reason, he stumbled upon a huge philosophical pickle. He had managed to clear a path for faith by putting some boundaries on knowledge, but he still hadn't quite nailed down where faith, morality, and practical thinking came into the picture. His theoretical work made it clear what pure reason couldn't uncover when it came to knowledge, But it raised fresh questions about things like human freedom, moral duties, and the essence of life that needed a whole new angle of inquiry. In the years following his first critique, Kant gradually crafted his views on practical philosophy through some key works. In 1785, he laid down the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, introducing the fundamental principle of morality and what he called the categorical imperative. By 1788, in the Critique of Practical Reason, he further unpacked moral psychology and the assumptions of practical reason. Then in 1797, the metaphysics of morals took these principles and applied them to realms of rights and virtues. Even before these heavy hitters, Kant was already hinting at his practical philosophy in the shorter essays. Take his essay, What is Enlightenment, for example. It described enlightenment as a person's journey out of self-imposed ignorance, sparked by the bravery to lean on one's own understanding. Then an idea for a universal history with a cosmopolitan purpose, he laid out a vision for humanity inching toward a global family of republican states. These writings showed how Kant's rigorous philosophy could tackle real-world questions about learning, politics, and societal growth. The link between his theoretical and practical sides goes deeper than it might seem at first glance. Both are grounded in the essential idea of the proactive, creative nature of human reason. Just like our understanding actively ties together raw experiences into coherent objects, practical reason drives our will according to its self-given rules. In either case, reason doesn't just sit back and find truths that are already out there. It actively creates the things it contemplates. This is part of Kant's broader belief in human dignity and independence. Humans aren't just natural entities bound by natural laws, nor are they merely logical beings chasing maximum satisfaction. Humans have the power to set rules for themselves, both in knowing and in doing. This independence is what makes humans uniquely precious, giving them a value beyond natural or economic worth. Freedom stands as a key bridge between Kant's theoretical and practical thinking. In one of his famous quandaries, the third antinomy, Kant suggested that freedom is at least conceivable because nature's strict rules impact only our perceptions, not things as they are in their essence. But that's not enough for morality. It demands that freedom be real. Practical philosophy's role is to show that freedom is not just something we can theorize about, but a real deal that we have to assume whenever we make moral decisions or take action. Kant's dive into practical philosophy was quite groundbreaking. While other moral thinkers might root ethical principles in human nature, divine wisdom, or how we achieve happiness, Kant was all about rooting morality in reason alone. He said moral truths must apply to every thinking being, regardless of their personal wants, situations, or cultural backgrounds. This means morality can't lean on anything we can touch or that changes. It's got to be anchored in pure practical reason. The shift from focusing purely on the theory to getting practical also marked a change in how reason itself worked. On the theoretical side, reason helps understanding by offering guiding stars that steer scientific exploration toward unified knowledge. But when it comes to practical matters, reason steps up, actually crafting the rules that guide our actions. Practical reason goes beyond just thinking about what to do. It shapes action by molding our will in line with moral truths. This shift explains why practical reason can achieve what theoretical reason can't quite reach. You know, even though theoretical thinking can't really give us insight into things themselves, our practical reasoning can actually help us understand our real nature as free and moral beings. It's through our moral sense that we get to see ourselves as part of a world ruled by moral laws, instead of just natural ones. So, morality helps us understand things about the non-physical world that theoretical philosophy said we couldn't grasp. Kant puts practical reasoning first because he strongly believes the big questions in life are about what we do, not just what we know. To him, knowledge is really valuable when it helps us act morally and improve our lives. This doesn't mean he was against smart thinking. Rather, he believed that intelligence should eventually lead to practical outcomes. Kant's focus on practical philosophy also echoes his interest in the political and societal changes of his time. He witnessed key events like the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the start of the Industrial Revolution. His writings in morality and politics dove into topics like individual rights, democratic governance, international affairs, and societal advancement, which were at the heart of the Enlightenment. Even so, Kant always tackled these themes using philosophical principles, not just tactics to gain political advantage. Alright, let's dive into part 9, focusing on Kant's big idea, the categorical imperative, which has had a massive impact on moral philosophy. This principle comes from Kant's efforts to uncover a basic rule that purely guides moral action through human reason, without involving personal experience or goals. Imagine the difference between a hypothetical imperative, which is more like a if you want X, then do Y situation, and the categorical imperative, which is more of a do this, because it's right, command that applies to everyone just because they are rational beings. Kant reached this profound idea by carefully examining how we naturally think about right and wrong. He noticed that when we say something is morally wrong, like lying, we're not just saying it's wrong for us, but for anyone in a similar spot. This universal aspect is what gives moral judgment its weight, setting it apart from our preferences or smart decisions. Kant's most well-known way of putting this imperative is by saying, act only according to that rule which you can wish would become a universal law. This idea challenges us to look at our actions and consider if having everyone follow the same rule would work out. If a rule can't logically be adopted by everyone, then it's probably wrong. But if it's doable and consistent across the board, the action might be okay. And if following the rule is a must, then it means the action is something we should morally do. To show how this test works, Kant offers a few classic examples. Take lying to get out of a financial jam. If everyone did this, the whole idea of making promises would fall apart because nobody would trust one another's promises. The rule breaks down the structure it relies on, meaning it's not a moral act. Now think about deciding not to help someone in the trouble, even if it's possible for everyone to ignore others without a contradiction. We can't really want a world where no one helps, because sooner or later we'd need help too. Wishing for such a world goes against wanting our well-being. Kant's second key formulation is called the formula of humanity. It suggests, act in a way that treats humanity, in yourself and others, as an end and never just as a means. It's about respecting the dignity of individuals, not using them as mere tools to our ends. This doesn't mean we can't ask for help or work with others, as long as we respect their autonomy and goals. This view explains certain wrongs the universal law idea might overlook. When we deceive, bully or manipulate others, we disregard their ability to make their own choices. Finally, Kant argued that these two approaches are really different sides of the same coin. While the universal law formulation looks at whether an action could universally apply, the humanity formula underscores the respect for human rationality. Both come from the notion that we can set our laws through our rationale, deserving respect because of that very capability. The third way of looking at things, known as the formula of the kingdom of ends, brings together the main ideas from the first two methods by imagining a world where rational beings are united under shared moral rules. In this kingdom, each rational being plays a dual role. They're leaders in creating these universal moral laws and participants who follow the same rules they helped establish. This ideal society is where moral actions aim to lead us, a place where all rational beings show each other the respect that is due to free and responsible moral agents. The categorical imperative stands apart from ways of thinking about ethics that focus on the outcomes of actions. According to Kant, what makes an action morally valuable is not what it achieves, but the guiding principle or intention behind it. If you act out of a sense of duty, recognizing a moral rule demands it, the action holds moral worth regardless of any negative results it might have. On the flip side, even if an action has positive outcomes, It lacks moral value if it's done for selfish reasons instead of being driven by a moral obligation. Kant's focus on moral motivation stems from his belief that the only truly good thing is a good will. Attributes like intelligence, bravery, wealth, or even happiness can be twisted for harmful purposes and are therefore not inherently valuable. However, a will that consistently makes choices based on moral duty, ignoring personal desires or consequences, is undeniably good. This benevolent will is what grants humans their unique dignity and provides the foundation for moral judgment. In recent discussions, scholars have pointed out that Kant's categorical imperative shouldn't be seen as a straightforward rule book for solving moral puzzles. Instead, it offers the core principle that steers moral thinking and provides clarity on why certain actions are right or wrong. Decision-making based on this principle requires insight and interpretation, meaning people might reasonably disagree on its application in specific situations. Yet this doesn't diminish its role as the higher standard of morality for all rational beings. Part 10. Let's diving into some big ideas about freedom, autonomy, and goodwill, with insights that come straight from Kant's moral philosophy. At the heart of it all is the idea of freedom, which is absolutely central to Kant's thinking about morals and ties his practical philosophy straight to the core of his theoretical work. Without freedom, there's no way to hold people morally accountable, and ideas like praising someone or blaming them wouldn't really mean much. Plus, without freedom, the idea of a categorical imperative, moral rules that apply to everyone, would fall flat. But figuring out how freedom fits into a world that seems to run on fixed rules is a whopping philosophical challenge. I mean, how do humans manage to be free when everything around us is governed by strict natural laws? Kant broke down freedom into different types, each with its own key role in his moral theory. There's negative freedom, which is about being able to act without being pushed around by our cravings and urges. Then there's positive freedom, which is about being able to decide for ourselves using principles that our reason says everyone should follow. And finally, there's transcendental freedom, the power that lets us start new actions without being chained by prior causes, which is what makes being morally responsible possible. This whole puzzle of matching up freedom with the strict rules of nature had philosophers scratching their heads for ages. How can our actions be truly free if everything in the natural world sticks to these set rules? Before Kant, some philosophers basically said, nah, real freedom isn't a thing, it's all natural causes, whereas others tried to carve out special rules just for human actions. But both approaches left Kant unsatisfied because one kills off moral responsibility and the other messes with the core of natural science. Kant's approach banks on his idea of transcendental idealism and the difference between things as we see them, phenomena, and things in themselves, noumena. In the world we experience, everything including human actions seems bound by natural laws. Each action we take has causes that make it inevitable, and from a scientific point of view, our behaviour could be predicted like any other natural event. However, when it comes to our noumenal existence, we're not boxed in by the chains of cause and effect, and have this transcendental freedom. It's not about acting on a whim, but about acting based on principles we set using pure practical reason. When acting morally, we're not just reacting to what life's throwing at us, but making universal moral laws through reason. This bit reflects our true nature in that realm of understanding governed by moral, not natural laws. Kant's idea of autonomy is a big deal. Autonomy, meaning self-rule, points to the thought that we as moral agents have to draft the rules that bind us ourselves. Unlike rules that might come from society, God, or just nature, autonomous principles spring from reason itself. When I follow the categorical imperative, I'm not just taking orders from the outside. I'm creating universal laws through my own rationality. That's what gives humans their special dignity, turning us into ends in ourselves, not just means to an end. Because we can create moral rules through reason, we hold a value beyond anything that can be priced or compared. This dignity isn't something you earn by achieving anything, nor is it gifted by anyone else. It's inherently part of being a rational being with moral self-determination. This forms the backbone of human rights and dictates that people deserve to be treated with true respect. Now, Kant's idea of the good will, which he famously dubs the only thing purely good, is all about a will that chooses duty over inclination consistently. This doesn't mean it always hits the mark with results. Things can go sideways no matter how well meant the actions. Instead, a good will sticks to what moral law demands, despite what you personally want, any societal nudging or expected outcomes. Our inherent goodwill is a reflection of being independent thinkers and is the root of our moral value as rational people. Kant's look into what drives us to make moral choices is quite nuanced and rooted in reality. He understood that humans aren't solely logical beings, but rather a mix of emotions and logic. We feel moral obligations as duties or constraints because we have desires that often clash with what being moral demands. For a purely logical being, acting morally wouldn't feel like a duty because it would naturally align with reason. On the other hand, a purely emotion-driven being wouldn't be able to act morally, since it wouldn't possess the ability to choose rationally. Hence, feeling a moral obligation highlights our dual existence as both physical and spiritual entities. When we sense the duty-bound constraints, it awakens us to a realization that we are more than just beings governed by natural laws. We gain insight into a world driven by rational principles rather than mere natural forces. This realization of moral consciousness offers practical evidence of our transcendental freedom, a concept that theoretical philosophy only deemed possible. Kant pointed out that true independence in making moral choices comes with maturity and enlightenment. Many fall short of true moral independence because they remain in what Kant termed self-imposed dependency, adhering to morals dictated by others instead of pondering moral questions independently. Effective moral education needs to build the capacity for independent moral judgment, not just teach agreeable moral views. The aim is to cultivate individuals capable of independent moral contemplation, making choices and accepting responsibility for them. Understanding the link between freedom and morality also clarifies why teaching morals is both achievable and essential. If humans were entirely controlled by natural causes or completely free, teaching morals would either be pointless or unnecessary. But since we're complex beings with both logical and emotional aspects, we can enhance our moral reasoning through experience, reflection, and practice. However, this growth isn't automatic. It demands deliberate effort and a supportive environment that nurtures rather than hinders our ability to choose morally and independently. Part 11. Alright, so after laying down the groundwork for his moral philosophy, Kant got busy with the critique of practical reason, which hit the shelves in 1788. This was Kant's way of wrapping up his big project of understanding how human reason works in our day-to-day moral decisions. This second critique wasn't just a sequel to the groundwork. It was a whole new take that dove into issues the first one didn't quite tackle. While the groundwork was all about figuring out the core principle of morality from our everyday moral experiences, the new book took a deep dive into what practical reasoning really is, how far it goes, and how it fits with our more fact-based understanding of the world. Kant structured this critique to mirror the critique of pure reason, but highlighted crucial ways practical reasoning stands apart. The analytic part nailed down the real-world impact of the moral law and showed how practical principles can be known through pure reason without experience. On the flip side, the dialectic part wrestled with the big paradox practical reasoning faces when aiming for the ultimate good, leading to the big ideas of God, freedom, and immortality. By parallel structuring these critiques, Kant was saying that practical reasoning is legit in its own right, working alongside but not beneath theoretical reasoning. One of the coolest things Kant did in the second critique was dig into emotions and their part in our moral lives. He came up with this thing called respect, which is the special feeling we get when we realize what morality demands. Unlike the feelings we're familiar with, like wanting something or being scared, respect comes straight from our reasoning and pushes us to do what's right, even when our personal desires are pulling us in another direction. This idea cracked open the question of how pure reason can actually get us moving, given that people aren't just rational machines but feel things too. Kant basically said that our reasoning doesn't ignore our feelings, but uses them, creating its own type of feeling with respect. Moving on, Kant also dug deep into how we juggle duty and inclination in our everyday moral decisions. He broke it down into 3 types: actions that go against duty, actions that line up with duty but are done for selfish reasons, and actions done because duty demands it, regardless of personal wants. According to Kant, only that last one truly counts as morally virtuous. This part of his work stirred the pot quite a bit. He basically said that while it's nice to feel naturally compassionate, that can't be the cornerstone of morality, because it doesn't always hold steady and isn't universally fair. Helping someone out of pure kindness is definitely better than harming them, but it only reaches moral good when we do it, because we recognize their worth as a person. People often gave Kant grief over this, assuming he thought you had to act like a robot and ignore feelings, but that wasn't his point. He wasn't against emotions. He just said they can't be the main reason why we do what's morally right. When our duties and desires happen to agree, great. We can feel good about fulfilling our duties while also enjoying the satisfaction of our inclinations. The trick is making sure duty is the reason for doing good, not just because it feels good, even if they both lead us in the same direction. Additionally, the second critique really fleshed out Kant's views on how we can teach and grow in our moral character over time. He made the point that having good moral character isn't something we're just born with. It's something we achieve through ongoing effort and attention. It's not enough to simply decide to be moral and leave it at that. Instead, we have to keep working on strengthening our sense of duty and minimizing our selfish urges. This journey to build moral strength is never really finished, because as rational but imperfect beings, we're always tempted to put our own happiness above doing what's right. Kant thought virtue was all about this relentless moral effort. Virtue, in his view, isn't about achieving moral perfection. Rather, it's about having the mindset to fight against urges that clash with our sense of duty. A virtuous person isn't someone who never feels tempted, but someone who picks duty over personal desire when the two don't line up. This makes being virtuous both tough and within reach. It's tough because you have to stay alert all the time, but it's doable because it hinges on your choices, not on having natural ability or a lucky set of circumstances. Kant's practical philosophy also dug into how we judge morality and apply moral principles to specific situations. He understood that while the categorical imperative is a top guiding principle, it doesn't solve every moral puzzle by itself. Figuring out how to apply these universal rules to real-life scenarios takes judgment, and people who are reasonable might not always agree on what the moral path is in a given situation. This doesn't take away from the objectivity of moral laws, but shows how complex moral life is, and how our understanding can fall short. Kant wrapped up his critique of practical reason with a famous reflection on the starry skies above us and the moral law inside us. These two sources of awe and admiration show the two ways we can see ourselves and our place in the universe. The starry skies remind us of how small and reliant we are in the grand scheme ruled by nature's laws. Meanwhile, the moral law within highlights our worth and our freedom as beings with the capacity to set universal rules through reason. Together they illustrate the dual nature of our existence. We're both creatures of nature and moral beings, subject to causality, yet capable of free choices. Part 12. Kant touches on some important moral issues. In the 12th part of his philosophy, Kant dives into some big questions about morals. We're talking about the all-important what can we hope for. After laying out that our duty is unshakable and that true moral worth comes from acting out of respect for the moral law, Kant hits a snag. How can morality ask us to do the impossible? It demands perfect virtue, but let's be real, us humans can't nail that kind of flawlessness. And then there's the tricky bit where virtue is supposed to lead to happiness. Yet let's face it, life doesn't play fair. The good guys often end up struggling while the bad seem to get all the breaks. Kant called this the antinomy of practical reason. On one side, morality tells us to aim for the ultimate good, a seamless mix of virtue and happiness. But on the flip side, it's like striving for this is a pipe dream. It sounds impossible because either true virtue's out of reach or life's just not set up to reward it with happiness. If achieving the highest good is demanded but impossible, it makes acting morally seem downright irrational. So, what's Kant's fix? He proposes that practical reason has to assume some things to make reaching that highest good plausible, even if pure logic can't prove them. These aren't just wild guesses. They're rational leaps that flow from moral duty itself. If we're supposed to work towards the ultimate good, we need to take for granted the ideas of freedom, immortality, and God's existence. These aren't factual statements or random beliefs, but they're a special kind of faith, rooted in moral duty. First up is freedom. It's the cornerstone. Without it, moral duty loses its meaning. We're not accountable if our actions aren't up to us, and moral rules would be pointless if we couldn't choose to follow them or not. Sure, science suggests everything follows natural laws, but to hold people morally responsible, we have to believe they're free. This isn't something to prove with facts, but a practical certainty that comes from our clear sense of moral obligation. Then there's immortality. Humans, as we know, can't become perfectly virtuous in just one go at life. The moral law says we need to completely align our will with duty, but we've got inclinations that don't always match up. Achieving a will that unfailingly picks duty over personal leanings is a tall order for humans. Practical reason steps in, suggesting the soul's immortality to give us endless time to get closer to perfect virtue. This doesn't promise we'll achieve it, but it lets moral growth go on endlessly, even if we never hit the absolute peak. Immortality means that progress isn't snuffed out by death, but can carry on forever. Lastly, the idea of God comes into play to sort out the fact that, in this world, virtue and happiness often don't align. Virtue's the key to this highest good, but happiness matters too, because we naturally want to feel good. Moral law isn't about misery, it's about prioritizing virtue while finding happiness in duty-aligned ways. However, since the natural world doesn't naturally factor in moral effort, there's no promise a good person will be happy, or that happiness equals virtue. Thus practical reason introduces the belief in God as a moral overseer, who can ensure virtue and happiness link up as they should. Kant isn't about proving God's existence like you'd prove a math or science fact. Instead, he sees God as essential for morality. God needs to be able to align the natural world with moral achievements, to know how to judge moral actions properly, and to ensure that happiness is dealt out fairly based on virtue. Only such a being could ensure that moral values come out on top over just natural occurrences. Kant was clear that these ideas aren't the same as having theoretical knowledge about things beyond the physical world. We're not sure that the soul is eternal or God exists like we're sure triangles have three sides or things fall when dropped. What we have is a solid practical belief, rooted in what moral action demands. This isn't just believing whatever without reason, or having provable facts, but it's a different way of understanding things, fitting for practical matters rather than theoretical ones. This concept of postulates shook up how people looked at traditional theological and philosophical ideas. Earlier thinkers tried to use only logical arguments to prove God's existence and the soul's immortality, going beyond what experiences could show. Kant pointed out in his first big work that these arguments don't work because they try to push categories where they shouldn't. By using practical reason over theoretical reason, he kept the core of religious beliefs alive, while dodging the strict claims his philosophical critique had toppled. This new angle on beliefs had a huge impact on later theology and philosophy of religion. Instead of trying to nail down religious truths with just logic, Kant showed how these beliefs rooted themselves in moral experiences and practical needs. This split science and faith into different parts of human reasoning. Science focuses on how the world appears to our understanding, while religion looks at deeper needs practical reason requires. The idea of postulates also responds to the big questions philosophy aims to answer. What can I know? Only what the first critique says is within reach. What should I do? Follow the categorical imperative. What can I hope for? That good deeds are rewarded and moral growth is possible. These all link to the broader question, what is a human being? We're beings with both rational thought and moral capacity, living between the physical world and the world of understanding. Part 13. Imagine back in 1790, the famous philosopher Immanuel Kant put out his last big philosophical work called The Critique of Judgment. This piece was super important to him, because it tied together all his thoughts from earlier works. His previous writings explored nature and freedom separately, nature being all about the universal laws that govern the world, while freedom was linked to moral choices and actions. But there was a burning question. How do these two realms fit together, and how does free will manage to operate within the natural world? Kant figured that there had to be another mental skill, bridging nature and freedom, besides understanding and reason, which were already established. This connecting skill was judgment, specifically what he called reflective judgment. Unlike determinate judgment, which shoves specific instances into preset categories, reflective judgment tries to find broader ideas or rules for the unique cases we encounter. Reflective judgment was key in making sense of art and living things. Kant didn't mean that nature has intentions like people do, but we often see beauty or purpose in it, like when admiring a stunning flower or pondering a complex creature. While nature doesn't have conscious goals, we naturally interpret certain things as if they do, a mindset that helps us dive deeper into understanding the world. Kant's critique splits into two parts, one focused on aesthetics and the other on recognizing purpose in nature. Despite their differences, both tap into the feeling of pleasure we get when our mind's abilities work in harmony, while engaging with something seemingly designed, but without a clear purpose. For aesthetics, this leads us to judge beauty and grandeur. For the natural world, it guides our understanding of living organisms and natural systems. This third critique isn't just another book in Kant's collection. It plays a crucial role in his overall philosophy by showing how the divide between nature and freedom isn't as stark as it seems. Beautiful creations in nature hint at a synergy between our minds and the world, which goes beyond plain mechanical explanations. Living things display a kind of inner purpose that pushes us towards seeing nature through a lens of purpose and design, not clashing with science, but adding another layer to it. Kant highlighted judgment's significance far beyond what people thought before him. It's not just about sticking labels on things, but is a constructive activity that links ideas in new ways. In science, reflective judgment helps us search for laws and categorize everything systematically. When it comes to art, it lets us reach beyond simple understanding to grasp beauty and awe. This process even explains how we form specific concepts from our experiences, since the basic categories alone wouldn't be enough for scientific discovery or daily life. Reflective judgment, then, is essential for bridging the abstract and the empirical world, making it a cornerstone in Kant's perspective on human knowledge. The third critique is super important, because it explains how we can feel at home in nature, even though we're both part of it and have our own moral responsibilities. When we see beauty in nature, it's like our thoughts and feelings are vibing with what we see, kind of like nature is synced up with how we process stuff. When we look into living organisms, we find they operate in a way that's similar to how we see purposeful actions in humans. This gives us a chance, as Kant called it, to believe that nature and our freedom can exist together without conflict. Kant's theories about beauty and art had a huge impact on art and literature critics. He described genius as the talent to create something original that leads the way for others, a cornerstone idea in the romantic view of making art. His notion that aesthetic ideas stimulate deep thought without being boxed into rigid concepts, made waves in how people understood symbolism and poetic language. He also stressed that appreciating art isn't just about it being pretty or teaching a lesson, but about its unique value. His thoughts on biology and science were just as big. He looked at living beings as having a purpose in nature that couldn't be chalked up to just mechanical physics, paving the way for future biology and systems theory. He argued that seeing things teleologically, or with purpose, wasn't about making things up but working within a mechanical worldview. This idea influenced guys like Darwin, who saw natural selection as a way to explain the seemingly intentional designs of nature without needing a designer. Through the critique of judgment, Kant wrapped up his big philosophical project by showing how the worlds of theory and practice he tackled in his earlier work should relate in a coherent way. Instead of being at odds, nature and human freedom are parts of a larger picture our minds can grasp, through varied but complementing methods. This big picture was key to Kant's goal of using philosophy to fully understand human reasoning across all experiences. Part 14. The Critique of Judgment. Kant takes a novel look at how we understand beauty and art. He shakes up the old ways of thinking that tied beauty either to the objective features of an object or to personal likes and dislikes. Instead, Kant sees aesthetic judgment as a special way of thinking that, although it's personal, also seems to apply universally. When we say something is beautiful, we're really commenting on how we feel about it, but we also kind of expect others to agree with us, and we think they're wrong if they don't. This odd mix of being both personal and universal is key to how we experience beauty. To unpack how we make judgments about beauty, Kant divides the process into 4 parts, each related to how we generally make judgments: quality, quantity, relation, and modality. Each part shows what makes aesthetic judgment different from judging things as simply true or false, or as good or bad. Together, these 4 parts outline what Kant calls judgments of taste, showing how they're logically organized and why they feel valid to us. First off, under quality, Kant explains that when we call something beautiful, we're not thinking about whether the thing exists, fulfills a need, or is useful. We appreciate beauty in a way that's detached from our interests in its reality or usefulness. Though disinterested, this doesn't mean we don't enjoy beauty. In fact, beautiful things often bring us deep pleasure and engage our minds. The pleasure we get isn't because the object fulfills a desire or goal, but because it seems just right for how our minds work when we see it. Moving on to quantity, Kant argues that when we claim something is beautiful, we believe others should see it the same way, even though we don't base this belief on facts or general rules. When I say a sunset is beautiful, I'm saying everyone should see it that way if they pay attention. But I can't prove its beauty by pointing out features or rules, because beauty isn't an inherent trait of the sunset. It's about how we respond to it. This leads to what Kant calls the antinomy of taste, where judgments of beauty feel universal, yet aren't grounded in concepts. Kant's solution is to separate logical universality, which is provable, from aesthetic universality, which isn't provable but assumes our shared human nature means we'd all respond similarly. In the third part, relation, Kant introduces the idea of purposiveness without purpose. Beautiful things seem like they're meant to be a certain way for a reason, but we can't pin down what that reason is. Take a flower. It looks perfectly put together, like everything about it has a place, but we can't say the flower is achieving a specific end. This perceived order sparks our imagination and understanding, which is what aesthetic experience is all about. Kant also differentiates between free beauty and dependent beauty by asking whether we use concepts of their purpose in our judgments. Free beauty, like what we see in flowers, abstract designs, and music, doesn't rely on knowing what an object is for. We just enjoy it for what it is. When we find beauty in objects, it's often because we're considering their intended use, like when we look at stunning churches, grand palaces, or artwork that has recognizable subjects. The idea here, particularly the modality, suggests that when we decide something is beautiful, it's not just a personal opinion that others could or should share. It's like they really must agree, but only if they're judging correctly. This feeling isn't logical, because you can't logically prove aesthetic judgments, but Kant referred to it as exemplary necessity. Beautiful things act as benchmarks for good taste, nudging others towards similar enjoyment without forcing them into a fixed response. Kant summed up beauty as the form of something's purposefulness, seen in it without considering an actual purpose. This definition covers key points. Beauty is about form rather than what something contains, about seeming purpose rather than an actual goal, and about how we perceive rather than know it conceptually. Beautiful items come across as perfectly structured for us to enjoy aesthetically, not because they fulfill any clear external function. They're like icons of freedom, appearing to operate under their own sets of rules rather than being pushed by outside forces. Kant also explored how natural beauty compares to artistic beauty, believing nature's beauty trumps artistic beauty because it sparks a moral interest that implies nature aligns with our highest moral goals. So when we admire a beautiful flower, a landscape, or an animal, we feel like nature is on our side, supporting our best aspirations. Artistic beauty can hit hard emotionally too, but it doesn't carry the same immediate moral weight, since it's made by people for people. Kant's take on aesthetic judgment has been hugely impactful in philosophy and criticism. It championed the independent nature of aesthetic experiences, keeping them connected to broader human interests and values. He explained how these judgments could be both personal yet universal, emotional yet thoughtful, specific yet exemplary. Most crucially, he illustrated how our responses to beautiful things speak volumes about human nature's ability to find meaning and value in things that might not serve a practical purpose, but instead invite us to immerse in their contemplation and admiration. Part 15. The sublime and the limits of imagination. Kant delves into the sublime as a key type of aesthetic experience alongside beauty, to explore different facets of our human nature and how we relate to the world. While beauty creates a harmonious feeling between our mental abilities and gives us uncomplicated joy, the sublime is a bit more complex. It starts with an overwhelming tension, but ultimately shows us something deeper about our capabilities, making it feel both unsettling and deeply significant. This profound engagement with the sublime ties directly into our moral tasks as thinking beings. Kant splits the sublime into two categories: the mathematical sublime and the dynamical sublime. The mathematical sublime kicks in when we face things that seem too massive for our senses to fully grasp, like standing before a vast mountain range, staring up at the starry night sky, or mulling over the immense span of geological time. When our imagination trips up trying to take these in, it brings out our ability to ponder limitless concepts that go beyond what we can actually see or feel, revealing a kind of reasoning that's not tethered to our senses. On the flip side, the dynamical sublime shows up when natural forces overpower us physically and threaten our very existence. Think violent storms, volcanic eruptions, or towering waterfalls. As long as we're watching these from a safe distance, we get a sublime kick from them. Nature's sheer power highlights our own physical helplessness, but it also sparks a realization of our moral strength as beings who can rise above and challenge nature's wildness through reasoning and moral duty. It's here we understand that, though physically smaller, our moral prowess makes us stand tall against nature. Experiencing both forms of the sublime involves a flip-flop of feelings, what Kant called a quick shift between being repelled and drawn to the same object. Initially, the sheer size or strength of an object intimidates us by overpowering our cognitive or physical skills. But then, that changes to a kind of allure, as we are reminded of our impressive mental abilities that aren't as limited. This sublime experience stands apart from simply appreciating beauty. While beautiful things click easily with our minds and make us feel happy without much fuss, sublime objects first trip us up and stir a mixed bag of feelings. some painful or uncomfortable, before settling into a more rewarding form of satisfaction. So the sublime isn't just about looks, it's about probing our higher capacities as moral and thinking beings. Kant said the true essence of the sublime isn't in the natural wonders themselves, but lies in how our minds respond to them. Mountains or storms aren't inherently sublime. They become so because of their impact on people who can reflect on them with moral and rational thought. This subjectivity is even more marked in the sublime than in beauty, since sublime experiences often lack the formal harmony and symmetry we tend to associate with beauty. Objects sparking a sublime reaction might actually be quite formless or even unattractive by typical beauty standards, but still evoke strong artistic responses, thanks to their sheer size or power. The mathematical sublime highlights our unique ability to think about realms that go beyond sensory restrictions. When imagining vast quantities is tough, our reasoning steps in with concepts of infinity that defy experiential limits, anchoring sublime experience in profound philosophical insights. On the other hand, the dynamical sublime underscores our moral essence and our ability to stand up to nature's might through moral conviction. In the grand scheme, whether we're dealing with overwhelming natural forces or vast expanses, Kant's take on the sublime tells us a lot about the depths of human experience and our capabilities, offering a rich view into how we perceive grandeur. Beyond mere aesthetics, just having physical bravery doesn't cut it when we're talking about the truly sublime. It's more than just braving the natural elements. To truly experience the sublime, you've got to recognize that even when nature's fury is at its peak, you can still hold on to your dignity and stay true to your values. This idea ties the sublime to our moral awareness and shows that we're logical beings with the power to act freely. Kant's take on the sublime had a huge impact on the writers and artists of the Romantic era. Thinkers like Burke, Wordsworth and Coleridge borrowed from Kant's ideas to dive into the wonders of nature and the sense of spiritual uplift they bring. Artists like Caspar David Friedrich painted breathtaking sceneries that captured the intense emotions Kant talked about. In romantic art and thought, the sublime took centre stage, offering a bridge between how we see beauty and the bigger questions about who we are and our place in the universe. Kant's ideas about the sublime also bolstered his moral philosophy, by showing that our aesthetic experiences can tap into our deeper non-physical nature. Kant argued that the realm of moral freedom isn't just a concept, but something we can truly feel. When we're moved by the enormity or might of nature, we're reminded of our ability to overcome natural limits with reason and moral strength. This gives a kind of artistic backing to the notions of human freedom and dignity. Nowadays, Kant's insight on the sublime rings true in how we view the environment. The vastness of nature, the impact of natural events, and the looming threats of climate change can spark feelings that match what Kant called the sublime. The sheer scale of environmental challenges can lead to the sort of mental stumbling block he linked to the mathematical sublime, while the raw force of nature feeds into the dynamical sublime. This means Kant's thoughts on aesthetics still help us understand our modern relationship with the environment. In a way, the sublime rounds out our understanding of aesthetics alongside beauty. While beauty helps us see the harmony between our mind and the world around us, the sublime highlights our mind's ability to rise above the natural world through our rational and moral strengths. Together, beauty and the sublime show how deeply aesthetic experiences connect us to nature, but also remind us of our power to transcend it. This makes aesthetic judgment a key link between our practical actions and the theoretical insights, balancing our natural and mystical sides. Part 16. Let's take a look at Kant's view of the entire process of creating works of art, paying special attention to what he calls genius. Kant describes genius as this natural gift, something you're just born with, that kind of sets the bar for art. This isn't just about having the skills or stuff you've learned over time, though of course those are important for actually putting art together. But it's this unique ability to produce something fresh and serve as a trendsetter without sticking to any laid out guidelines. Kant made this distinction between natural and artistic beauty. When you look at something beautiful in nature, it seems like it has a purpose even if it doesn't. It's like nature's working without a blueprint. But art, on the other hand, is made with intention and thought. So how does art give off that vibe of being naturally beautiful and effortless? Kant suggests that this is where genius comes in. It goes beyond just conscious planning. Through genius, artists create pieces that give the impression they follow their own set of internal guidelines. There are 4 key traits that, according to Kant, set genius apart from mere knack or craftsmanship. First, genius is about being original, coming up with stuff nobody's laid rules for yet. Second, works produced by genius become benchmarks that others look up to, without being straight-up copies. Third, a genius can't break down their process scientifically or pass on their methods like a rule book for others. Fourth, genius is something you find in fine arts, not in fields like science or math, because those depend on logic rather than aesthetic flair. Now, about being original. It doesn't mean artists just magically conjure stuff up from scratch or totally ditch artistic traditions. What they do is tweak and transform what's already out there into something that feels both inevitable and totally new. Say, a brilliant composer might use well-known harmonies and patterns but mix them in a way that sounds completely fresh. Or a poet might use ordinary language to convey powerful meanings that go way beyond everyday interpretations. This nifty twist on familiar stuff makes art both easy to get into and surprisingly fresh. The role of genius helps explain how artistic traditions grow and stay alive through the ages. The groundbreaking works by iconic artists stick around not just because they wowed their first audiences, but also because they unlock new doors for future creators to step through. Think of Bach's fugues, Shakespeare's plays, or Michelangelo's sculptures. They're models not because later artists copied them line for line, but because they showed new ways to envision artistic creation and beauty. Kant's take on art brings in the idea of aesthetic ideas, which is one of his standout contributions. An aesthetic idea is like a burst of creative imagination that feeds your thoughts but can't be fully captured by just one concept. These ideas aren't like logical ideas that need specific intuition. Aesthetic ideas spur the imagination, sort of like how rational ideas play into Kant's other philosophical pieces. In art, these aesthetic ideas let creators say things without actually spelling them out. A love poem isn't just about defining love but painting feelings and connections that definitions can't quite nail. A landscape painting is more than a picture of one place. It taps into emotions about nature, time and humanity that go beyond straightforward words. A piece of music doesn't point to anything concrete outside itself, but crafts an emotional journey that speaks without words. To foster these aesthetic ideas, artists use what Kant calls aesthetic attributes, enriching logical thinking with a creative flourish. When an artist paints an eagle, the logical traits are what make it clear that the creature is an eagle and not some other type of bird. But the artistic traits go beyond that, sparking ideas of power, freedom and nobility, ideas that stretch our imagination past just the notion of an eagle. These aesthetic aspects are what empower artworks to convey a deeper message than just what they show at first glance. Kant made a distinction between fine art and other types of art, like mechanical and agreeable art, based on their connection to aesthetic ideas. Mechanical art, like building furniture or engineering, follows strict rules and aims for particular practical outcomes. Agreeable art is more about pleasure and entertainment, without reaching for meaningful depth, similar to crafts or popular shows. Fine art, on the other hand, mixes the freedom to explore with the seriousness of intention, crafting pieces that invite reflection and interpretation without locking into one set meaning or purpose. The idea of genius clarifies why you can't create masterpieces just by following a formula. Making art involves imagination, understanding and judgment working together in ways you can't plan for or achieve through technique alone. While artists must learn the skills and know the traditions, the magic of creating something truly original comes from a spontaneous mental spark that can't be controlled or copied mechanically. Thus, teaching art is about nurturing natural talents rather than just passing down techniques or information. This concept of aesthetic ideas has deeply influenced later ideas about what art means and how we should interpret it. It accounts for how artworks can be detailed enough for in-depth analysis, while also welcoming various interpretations. It shows us how art can touch both our emotions and our intellect without being boiled down to just feelings or ideas. Art goes beyond the limitations of everyday language but stays rooted in shared human experiences and cultural traditions. Kant's aesthetic theory also touches on how art and moral growth are interconnected. Even though art doesn't directly offer moral teachings or advice, it helps build the skills needed for moral decisions and actions. The experience of art broadens our imaginative understanding of what humans can be, and enhances our ability to appreciate value without bias. This artistic education gets us ready for moral choices by training us to look beyond our own interests and recognize values that go beyond personal gain. The concept of genius ties up Kant's ideas about aesthetic experience by detailing how human creativity can make things worthy of our aesthetic judgment. Just like natural beauty hints at a balance between mind and nature, artistic beauty showcases our ability to craft objects that rise beyond personal intentions or cultural settings. This makes art a unique human accomplishment, revealing our creative potential while linking us with the larger community engaged in aesthetic judgment and interpretation. Part 17. In the second half of the Critique of Judgment, Kant dives into his ideas on teleological judgment. This is all about how we make sense of living things in natural systems that seem to be designed to work a certain way. Kant saw that simply explaining things through mechanical means, while crucial for scientific studies, just doesn't quite capture the complexity of how living organisms organize and act. However, we can't just say it's all divine design or magical life forces, because that would mess with how natural science works. So teleological judgment offers a way to think about biological stuff that adds to mechanical explanations without clashing with them. Kant said a natural purpose is something that, in a particular sense, is both what causes itself and what it results in. In living things, every part plays a role for other parts in the whole, and the whole is also there for the parts. Take a tree, for example. It grows leaves for photosynthesis, which feeds the roots, which support the trunk, which then helps make more leaves. This kind of cycle doesn't fit into simple mechanics, where causes lead to effects in a straight line. You need teleological thinking to acknowledge how parts and wholes rely on each other in self-organizing systems. Back in the 18th century, how to explain life was a big headache for philosophers and scientists. Mechanics tried to describe everything using the movement of matter under universal laws, like in physics and chemistry. But living things seemed to have ways of organizing and behaving that didn't fit neatly into mechanical explanations. They reproduce, keep their structure despite constant change, grow following internal rules and adapt to their surroundings. These abilities seem to need some purposeful causation that's more than just bumping mechanical parts around. Kant's idea was that teleological judgment should be seen as a guiding framework rather than a fixed rule. We can't say for sure that organisms are definitely natural purposes, because that would mean knowing something beyond what we can experience. But to analyze and grasp their unique traits, we should study them as if they are natural purposes. This way, it steers scientific work without jumping to metaphysical conclusions about life's real nature or any non-mechanical causes out there. This guiding nature of teleological judgment means it enhances rather than substitutes mechanical explanation. Scientists should aim to make mechanical sense of biological matters as much as possible, since that route gives the strongest and most predictable knowledge in natural sciences. Nonetheless, when mechanical models fall short, teleological ideas can help move the research forward and suggest new experiments. This blend of methods allows multiple ways of explaining things to coexist without forcing all biology into a purely mechanical frame. Kant's look into organisms brought him to what he called the antinomy of teleological judgment. On one side, the thesis argues that everything in the material world should be seen as possible under just mechanical laws. On the flip side, the antithesis argues that some natural creations can't be fully understood this way. Both points seem vital: the thesis for keeping scientific practices intact, and the antithesis for recognizing what makes living things special. Solving this dilemma hinges on telling apart determinate from reflective judgment. Determinate judgment follows mechanical principles and gives concrete knowledge about natural things, as long as you can fit them under universal laws. Reflective judgment, which relies on teleological principles, provides a framework for exploring aspects that seem to stretch beyond pure mechanics. You need both to fully grasp nature, though they work on different levels and play distinct roles in scientific research. During Kant's era and onwards, this approach had a big impact on biological science. Alright, so here's the lowdown. The text points out that biologists shouldn't completely ditch the idea of explaining life through mechanical processes in favor of theories that rely on mysterious forces or substances we can't see or touch. It also acknowledges that if scientists only focus on breaking things down into smaller pieces, they might miss out on the bigger picture of how life is organized and evolves. What's tricky for biology is to come up with explanations that rely on known processes, but still capture how living things appear to be working towards some goal, without claiming that goals cause things to happen. Kant's ideas about how nature seems purposeful also tackle the bigger question of how everything fits together systematically. If you think the universe is just a bunch of matter interacting mechanically, then how do we get those clear, law-driven phenomena we're able to study scientifically? According to this type of thinking, nature seems to have a goal-directed organization, allowing us to make sense of it scientifically, even if we can't definitively say this is due to an actual design or just a framework our minds create. This sense of purpose helps us organize natural phenomena into systems and find broad laws that tie together different observations. The idea of purpose doesn't stop with biology. It covers all of science. By assuming nature is logically organized and classifying things, scientists use these goal-directed ideas that extend beyond pure mechanical explanations. This doesn't mean nature is made for us to understand, but approaching it that way is crucial for scientific progress. Basically, understanding nature in a purposeful way is key to turning philosophical concepts into practical scientific knowledge. Kant's thinking left its mark on evolution and systems biology. Darwin himself read Kant and appreciated how he emphasized scientific over religious explanations for what looks like design in nature. Modern systems biology uses ideas about self-organization and feedback that resonate with Kant's thoughts on organisms. Environmentalists also use these ideas to look at ecosystems as wholes that sustain themselves through complex interactions. The text ties these ideas to current debates about whether science can fully explain life through just physics and chemistry, or something else is at play. Kant thought living organisms need this mix of both detailed and bigger picture thinking, mirroring today's arguments about whether we need more than just physics to fully understand life. His view on looking at purpose as a guideline bridges the gap between hardcore reductionists, who want to break everything down completely, and those who think new powers arise at higher complexity levels. This approach is still important for understanding how different scientific explanations fit together. Part 18. Kant's political philosophy stands out as one of the most thorough and impactful efforts to base politics on moral grounds, rather than just tactics or dominance. Writing in a time of revolutions and budding democratic ideals, he aimed to demonstrate how political systems can be arranged to honor human dignity while keeping social harmony and encouraging human progress. His perspective typically highlights the supremacy of justice over mere convenience and stresses the importance of constitutional frameworks to limit unchecked power through legal means. At the heart of Kant's political theory is his idea of the inherent right to freedom. Every individual naturally holds the right to be free from the controlling will of others, as long as this freedom can exist alongside the freedom of everyone else under a universal law. This foundational right isn't given by society or government. It belongs to individuals simply because they are human. Political systems are valid only when they protect and foster this core freedom, instead of restricting it randomly. From this basis, Kant gave rise to what he called the Republican Constitution, which he saw as the only government type that aligns with human dignity and moral values. Republicanism demands three main elements: freedom for all societal members as human beings, legal equality as subjects, and independence as engaged citizens in lawmaking. These tenets reject both tyranny, where rule is without law, and pure democracy, where a majority might oppress minorities without constitutional bounds. Genuine republicanism necessitates a representative government, power separation, and constitutional safeguards for personal rights. Kant made a clear distinction between government structure and administration style. Government structure revolves around who holds utmost power: one ruler in an autocracy, a select few in an aristocracy, or all people in a democracy. Administration style pertains to how power gets wielded: despotically with no power separation, or republically with constitutional limits. He contended that republicanism can coexist with various government forms, though democracies risk turning despotic by blurring the lines between legislative and executive powers. Shifting from a state of nature to a civil society is not just a sensible choice but a moral duty. In the natural state, individuals hold rights but lack institutional means to define and enforce those rights amidst competing claims. This sparks inevitable conflict, where even those with good intentions can't guarantee rights security. Creating a civil constitution with legislative, executive and judicial branches is thus a responsibility rational beings owe to themselves and others. Perhaps Kant's most renowned political contribution is his essay, Toward Perpetual Peace, which lays out the prerequisites for ending internation wars. He suggested 6 initial peace articles between states, such as abandoning standing armies, forbidding interference in other states' internal matters, and gradually eliminating war-financing national debts. These initial steps aim to remove immediate international conflict triggers and foster lasting peace conditions. The ultimate peace articles set 3 core principles for international relations. Firstly, each state's civil constitution should be republican, ensuring war and peace decisions come from those facing the consequences, not rulers offloading costs onto others. Secondly, the right of nations should hinge on a federation of free states resolving conflicts through law, not force. Finally, cosmopolitan rights should be confined to universal hospitality conditions, safeguarding individuals' rights to travel and engage in peaceful trade across borders. The idea of a world federation embodies Kant's most revolutionary and visionary political suggestion. Just like how people have to leave the wild chaos of nature and agree to live under a set of rules, countries also need to move past the chaotic international scene and set up legal systems to solve their squabbles without fighting. This idea would lead to a federation, not a one-world government taking away national power, but more like a group of nations agreeing to sort out their problems through laws instead of war. Each country would keep control over its internal affairs, but would agree not to bully other countries. Kant thought lasting peace wasn't just wishful thinking, but doable with 3 big reasons backing it up. First, when citizens have a say through republican constitutions, war becomes less likely since it's the people who endure its hardships, that resist engaging in conflicts for the sake of their leaders. Second, countries doing business together create ties that make war a bad idea because it's costly for everyone. Third, as people get wiser, they learn to understand and respect each other, cutting down on cultural mix-ups that can cause fights. Kant's ideas about international relationships show his belief that everyone on Earth is part of the same moral family, despite being split into different countries. He didn't aim for open borders or equal wealth distribution worldwide, but he did insist that visitors and refugees have basic rights and stood against the kinds of colonial exploitation that happened in Europe during his time. His thoughts have had a big impact on the way international laws, human rights and global governance have developed over time. When it came to civil disobedience, revolution, and political change, Kant had his own ideas. He was usually against revolution since it tore apart the legal structures needed to protect rights, but supported slow, steady change through proper channels. He believed leaders should govern in ways that uphold human dignity and growth, focusing on laws rather than just what they want or what the public immediately demands. Kant's political ideas have reached far beyond just academics, shaping actual institutions and movements. The United Nations founders used Kant's concepts about countries working together and keeping peace. Human rights documents often echo his beliefs about the dignity of every person and universal morals. Modern democracy still wrestles with Kant's ideas about how to balance personal freedoms with group decisions. And in dealing with worldwide environmental issues, Kantian methods are being used to find solutions that affect everyone, regardless of borders. Part 19. Religion within the bounds of mere reason. Kant set out to demonstrate how long-standing religious convictions could be reimagined through reason, without falling into the trap of dogmatic theology or outright skepticism. This essay marks Kant's most thorough exploration of how moral philosophy ties in with religious faith. He explains how practical reasoning can bolster religious optimism while adhering to the strict boundaries outlined by his theoretical philosophy. Kant wanted to retain the core of religious belief, but anchor it in moral experience instead of speculative theory or historical accounts. For Kant, the main religious question is this: can humans become morally worthy of happiness, despite their intrinsic tendency towards evil? This isn't something we can determine through theoretical knowledge because it addresses moral character's roots, which are beyond our experience. Yet practical reason compels us to confront this question, since moral actions strive toward achieving the highest good, requiring that virtue and happiness eventually align. Religion steps in here, filling the gap by offering hope that moral endeavours will eventually bear fruit. In delving into human nature, Kant identified what he termed radical evil, a trait of all finite rational beings. This isn't about an originally pure nature going corrupt, but rather an unavoidable inclination to prioritize self-love over moral duty when they clash. Unlike the concept of original sin in classic Christian theology, Kant's radical evil isn't about inherited guilt. Instead, it's about the universal human habit of justifying selfish acts and dodging the full weight of moral obligations. This evil is radical because it gets to the core of moral decisions, but it's not all-consuming. Humans can still choose to prioritize their duties over personal desires. Turning over this evil requires what Kant described as a revolution in moral disposition. This shift can't be accomplished through slow reform. Since the problem lies in the basic principle guiding our decisions, beating it demands a drastic overhaul of moral character rather than just adjusting specific actions. This transformation should be chosen freely by every individual, but it might also need some help beyond human capacities. Religion tackles this issue by suggesting divine grace that aids human moral efforts without replacing them. Kant viewed traditional Christian teachings more as moral symbols than literal historical facts. For instance, the idea of incarnation reflects the ideal of perfect morality, serving as a blueprint for our moral growth. Atonement points to the chance that past moral missteps can be rectified through genuine dedication to virtue. Resurrection conveys the hope that moral integrity will eventually overcome natural decay and death. These teachings hold religious value not because they narrate supernatural events, but because they deliver moral insights that drive ethical living. The notion of the highest good is key in marrying morality and religion. Morality demands virtue as the top condition for all worth, yet it also acknowledges that virtuous folks ought to be happy in alignment with their virtue. Since this balance is rarely achieved in real life, practical reason insists on certain conditions to make it feasible, like divine justice ensuring virtue is rewarded, and a continued existence allowing endless moral growth. These ideas transform moral hope into religious belief, sidestepping the need for theoretical knowledge about things beyond our senses. Kant made a clear distinction between rational faith and historical faith. Rational faith springs from moral foundations and covers truths accessible through practical reason to anyone, irrespective of cultural heritage or historical context. On the flip side, historical faith is tied to specific revelations and traditions. Although these might contain rational truths, they're not something pure reason can access on its own. While having faith in historical events can certainly bolster and add depth to rational faith, it just can't lay the groundwork for a universally accepted religious truth because it hangs on historical facts that could have gone differently, rather than sticking to solid rational principles. That line of thinking pushed Kant to imagine a slow makeover, where historical religions morph into communities focused purely on moral principles. As people get wiser, they'll spend less time obsessing over rituals, bickering over doctrines and bowing to clerical authority. Instead, they'll zero in on the moral core that gives religion its real meaning. The real church, in Kant's view, is an invisible gathering of all people who are dedicated to virtue, no matter what religion they belong to or where they come from. This moral church is the ideal all historical religions should aim for as we human beings grow up. Kant also tackled the issue of evil and suffering in our lives. Unlike the classic attempts that try to justify why God allows evil, Kant was more interested in how people handle evil as a chance to grow morally. Hard times can serve a higher purpose by testing how serious we are about doing our duty, building up our ability to feel for others, and reminding us that we rely on other people and ultimately on God. But let's be clear, suffering isn't good on its own. Its value only shines through if it helps us grow morally and better understand what we ought to do. Kant's view on religion is built on the idea that religious truths should be judged by how they affect our moral lives, not by theoretical debates. A religious belief is on point if it leads to real virtue, fosters respect for human dignity, and keeps hope alive for moral advancement. But it's off the mark if it kills moral motivation, provides a cover for cruelty or oppression, or makes people lose hope that we can be better. This pragmatic take on religious truth shows Kant's belief that the real purpose of our thinking is to boost moral good. His take on religion has hugely shaped theology and the philosophy of religion that came after him. Liberal Protestantism borrowed a lot from Kantian ideas as it built approaches to Christian faith that don't rely on strict dogma. Religious existentialists like Kierkegaard and Tillich found a lot to like in Kant's stress on practical faith and moral dedication. Even today, philosophers chat about Kantian issues like how reason and faith play together, what religious beliefs mean for morality, and whether universal religious truths are even possible. Kant's essays on religion also show his broader belief that philosophy should help people thrive, not just tickle intellectual curiosity. By grounding religious hope in moral experience, Kant offered support to those who couldn't buy into traditional theological claims but still craved religious meaning and drive. This makes religion fit nicely with what science tells us by placing religious truth in the realm of everyday living, rather than a theoretical musing. It also opens the door for everyone to access religious faith, based on shared moral experiences, rather than historical revelations that split people into opposing camps. Part 20. So Kant's big three critiques, pure reason, practical reason, and judgment, really changed the game in the world of philosophy. Each of these works dives into core questions about human understanding and our abilities, covering everything from what we can truly know to how we ought to behave and even how we perceive beauty. Together they offer a full overview of our intellectual, ethical and artistic abilities. The critique of pure reason tackles what we can know through logic and theory. Then the critique of practical reason jumps into how we should act based on moral reasoning. Lastly, The critique of judgment ties everything together, showing how our taste and sense of purpose connect nature and freedom. But this wasn't just some fancy structure Kant put together. He genuinely believed that human reason is fundamentally one, no matter the context. Whether we're figuring out facts, making moral calls, or getting moved by art, we're using the same core ability to bring chaos into order through self-imposed ideas and rules. Kant's critical approach laid down a new roadmap for philosophy that still holds sway today. He flipped the script, not starting with guesses about reality, but by examining what human reason can realistically handle. This method digs into the basic, no experience needed conditions that let us have experiences, act morally, and make judgments about beauty, while not pretending to know how things stand outside our understanding. Kant's lasting legacy perhaps shines brightest in his view of human dignity as rooted in our rational freedom. Unlike the thinkers before him, who tied human value to intelligence or community roles, Kant insisted dignity comes from our ability to govern ourselves through reason. This idea that each of us has inherent worth that can't be swapped for anything else has deeply shaped modern ideas about human rights and fair governance around the world. His impact stretches way beyond academia. In the real world, Kant's view offers a playbook for checking if laws and personal actions are fair based on their universality and respect for others. His ideas influence debates in business, medicine, how we treat the environment, and international dealings. His take on moral independence has shaped how we think about education, therapy, and even criminal justice, which now often leans more towards reform than punishment. Kant did a number on how we view art and beauty too. He separated aesthetic judgment as personal, but at the same time universally relatable, giving arts their own space yet linking them to deeper human values. His thoughts on what makes someone a genius revamped how people viewed creativity in romantic literature and art in the 19th century. Even today, thinkers are still wrestling with Kant's insights on the link between beauty and ethics, what art really means, and the part emotions play in art appreciation. In epistemology, Kant flipped the script by arguing that knowledge isn't just about soaking up facts, it's actively created by the mind. This laid the groundwork for advances in psychology, cognitive science, and philosophy of mind, highlighting that our brains play a big role in how we see and understand the world. Modern debates around how we organize knowledge, shifts in scientific thinking, and the idea that understanding is socially built all echo back to Kant's break from the mold in how the mind shapes experience. Even philosophers who don't agree with certain Kantian ideas usually nod to his main insight, that knowledge is about merging sensory input with conceptual understanding. In the realm of politics, Kant's idea of achieving lasting peace through international law and democratic setups has left a big mark. Bodies like the League of Nations, the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, and various human rights agreements all mirror Kant's views on settling disputes with laws, not battles. Modern talks about world governance, humanitarian efforts, and global democracy lean heavily on Kant's thoughts about universal moral principles and the slow spread of legal systems beyond just one country's laws. The European Union stands out as a major success in trying to bring Kant's dream of peaceful unity among once warring countries to life. Kant's take on religion has shaped both open-minded theology and secular stances on meaning and worth. By relating religious belief to moral experience, instead of theoretical arguments or historical claims, Kant offered tools for those searching for spiritual significance in a science-driven, diverse world. His focus on religion as a moral growth tool, rather than a source of facts about the supernatural, has shaped today's discussions about religious variety, interfaith exchanges, and the role of spirituality in well-being. Kant's methodical philosophy continues to ignite the curiosity of those looking for an all-encompassing understanding of human experience and knowledge. While few today aim to build systems as grand as Kant's, his work shows that digging into particular issues helps us understand bigger questions about knowledge, morality, and meaning. His approach of questioning the foundations needed for different experiences is a strong tool that philosophers use in many fields. Most importantly, perhaps Kant's philosophy reflects a stance on human reason that marries belief in its power with an awareness of its boundaries. Human reason is capable of true understanding, making moral choices and appreciating real beauty, but only within certain limits that careful reflection can unveil and honour. This mix of rational trust and intellectual modesty offers a way to tackle tough issues needing both deep thought and an awareness of our limits. In today's world, filled with unmatched scientific knowledge and ongoing global issues, Kant's approach to critical reasoning remains just as valuable and inspiring as it was back in the day. The questions he posed, what can I know? What ought I to do? What may I hope? And what is the human being? Stay central to how we understand ourselves. His thorough attempt to answer these questions through a careful look at reason itself set a new bar for philosophical depth and completeness. Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, anyone diving deep into the core questions about understanding, ethics, aesthetics, politics, or faith has to wrestle with the challenges Kant highlighted and the strategies he crafted to deal with them. This guarantees that Kant's impact will stick around as long as people search for a rational grasp of themselves and their place in the world.